Welcome to another episode of Beyond the Journey. That could be what it's called.
Oh, yeah, that's nice. Beyond the journey.
Welcome to episode 1 of Beyond the Journey.
We decided to keep it real casual today.
Welcome to bed. Everybody get cozy.
Yeah.
Make yourself at home. We are.
We're going to talk a little bit about some client stories today.
Well, you guys hear this. Her client stories are wild.
Yeah, it's
They're so good.
difficult to decide which one to talk about because there's so many variety and they're very personal. So I'm not going to say anybody's name or anything, but I wanted to figure out what kind of stories might be beneficial to share. Besides our own stories too, right? Because that's also psychedelic.
Yeah, we have a friend here in Mexico City. You can't know her name. We got to protect clients, client confidentiality always. But you do deserve to hear about this because this is I'm not gonna say it's atypical, but it's a great story to understand what the power of microdosing could do potentially for you.
Yeah. So this particular client, friend of ours, was dealing with some low grade depression and just felt that there was change underway, but just wasn't sure where to go with it. So
Talk about what low grade depression.
she wasn't taking any antidepressants or anything, but just feeling low energy and just stuck in some of her own little hamster wheels, I would say. A lot of people deal with low grade depression and don't get support for it.
Is it was she like stuck to the bed?
No,
Okay, so
no,
I'm
she was,
asking because that was the type of depression I was having.
yeah, no, it's low grade. So you wouldn't have known she was depressed. You wouldn't have known she was depressed. She was just doing her regular adult life things. So there wasn't anything really super outrageous about her situation. She was actually fairly social and very kind, beautiful human. So she came and was curious about microdosing. She had heard about it before a little bit and just wanted to know more. And so we talked about it. I explained the process, and it was enough to make her feel comfortable to be ready to microdose. And so the way that she did it on her own at home, she didn't have a therapist or any professional help because, again, she's just a regular average human that's going about life feeling a little bit depressed and confused about her trajectory in life. So we set her up with some microdoses. She was at home, like I said. I had her think about her intentions about her microdosing journey. So that's really important because you're only going to microdose for a specific period of time before you want to take a break. And this isn't meant to be something that you're on like medication for years, not at all. So because it's a specific time frame where you microdose, it's always important to have goals. What is this for? So for her, it was just to get a little more in touch with herself and what she needed to learn and do in order to relieve herself of her depression and find a little more clarity on her trajectory in life.
So what was her recommended like period of time for
So
microdosing?
she is on a 3-month program. She's actually not even through the 3 months yet and has already put us into tears because of how incredibly beautiful her testimonial was to us. And because Jen's my partner, she helps me and she's also a coach. And so she's good facilitator as well. So this beautiful individual, we'll call her Sarah. Sarah had the typical response in the beginning. So, typical meaning if you saw my other video about what you might feel within the first 1 to 2 weeks, it was in that range where she was feeling very less agitated. She was feeling a little relief around some of her frustrations with just very surface level stuff, which is nice to just relieve yourself of some of this extra static that you don't really need. So she was on a typical trajectory. And then within the second or third week, we talked about how she was experiencing more intuition coming up, and she was like, "Maybe it's just coincidence, but I'm pretty sure it's intuition." She was feeling more into her getting into herself. She had some realizations around how she had a fear of judgment So she started to feel the sensitivity of some of her underlying beliefs coming up that were potentially blocking her from feeling good. She was having some general fears coming up around being judged and afraid of not living up to expectations, whether it's family expectations, cultural expectations, or personal expectations
Were you saying that this was about the mushrooms? About working with the mushrooms, or were you saying
in
in her life?
general.
Yeah, because I remember she was also worried about that for going to do and try microdosing too. She was afraid of being judged in that way as well before she
Definitely.
started. So,
Yeah. So it's
yeah.
very common experiences for folks to just feel worried about what other people will think, worried about where you might end up. And so the microdosing regimen that we do with her is very subperceptual, very easy and gentle on the system. So the levels are low enough to where you don't really feel it, but you do experience some amount of opening, but it feels very normal. So it's hard to put into words. So she was on a general trajectory. And within about a month and a half of her being into her 3-month microdosing program, she left a beautiful voice note. And Jen was with me, so we listened to it together and we were just literally in tears.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. It was like she's like a poet.
Yeah, definitely. And it was so beautiful. And what she had described was just that she had finally gotten to a point to where she loved herself so deeply, and that she had never really loved herself more than she had in this moment. And a lot of times with my clients, I talk about ceremony, the importance of ceremony, not necessarily taking big mushrooms and doing that kind of ceremony, but like a birthday or a wedding or a graduation. Ceremonies are really important, so because they change our perspective. So when you go into, say, a graduation and then you come out, now you have a degree, now you're a doctor, now you're in whatever it is, right? So the ceremony marks the transition of I'm this way before the ceremony and I'm this way after. And there's actually some science around the subconscious and rewiring your brain through ceremony. So I often bring this up. When you're microdosing or going through anything in your life, you can create ceremony for yourself, whether you're just at home and you light a candle and you realize that you are now different. And in that ceremony, it marks that moment. So I had been talking to her about doing ceremony, and she had explained that she'd been thinking about it and hadn't really done it, but then in this moment, she had unraveled so much of herself that she got back to her inner child, and some of her cultural symbols just appeared for her. And it kind of like, when I say appeared, I just mean whether it's something you just look over and you see a picture of whatever it is, then it's just there. It's not like a magical apparition. I just mean in a general sense, all of these pieces came together for her in this moment, and she said that was her ceremony. She realized she was in tears, just rocking with her inner child, and just really felt, wow, I really love myself. And man, so heartwarming, because it's like, wow, this is why this medicine is so special. Whether you're doing big journeys or microdosing, it's so special to support people and to know that this experience is possible, to where we can be in a place where we don't even realize what we need, and then get to these deep realizations that really connect us.
I think that's the difference for me between like microdosing or using mushroom medicine versus pharmaceuticals, because just a really quick story about using pharmaceuticals to treat something. I have ADHD and I tried going on a prescription medication for it. And although it might fix the one symptom that you're looking for it to fix, and I'm not saying nobody should do pharmaceuticals, I'm saying there's a place for and a time for everything.
Mhm.
And of course, it's perfectly okay to use antidepressants and
Definitely.
anti-anxiety medication or ADHD medication if it works for you and if your doctor prescribes it to you and if all of those things align and then it also feels good in your body and it feels like it's actually working with your system to heal or to alleviate whatever symptoms you're feeling. But what I noticed was when I started doing microdoses in conjunction with a lot of other supplements, I'm not gonna lie. It wasn't just the microdoses for me, but I think it was for Sarah. Um, I felt the difference of having more control over my body. Not in a way where I'm trying to force my body to do something, but the prescription medication felt like it really had me feeling like I was out of control of my body, even
Mhm.
though in the very beginning it felt like it was working. It's interesting to hear these stories about your clients and how they're affected because it works in a more holistic way, if that makes sense. It feels like it's working with the whole system, and I think it does, right? Because it's working with the nervous system.
Mhm.
You can really tell that it's not just picking a certain group of symptoms to alleviate, but then leaving, the side
Other
effects and
issues.
other issues in your body.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
definitely because it is working with the nervous system, and the nervous system is central communication for your entire body. It really brings everything together more than isolating and trying to only do this versus only do that. It does feel more holistic to me for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Sarah, now still in her microdosing regimen, is feeling so much better, feeling so much more with herself, so social and out there doing activities and just really thriving. It's really incredible. And I can't wait to share this with her
Yeah.
because I really appreciated her reflection on her process. So that's her. So on another spectrum, we have another client that is in a different situation than Sarah was. And we'll call this client
Amanda.
Amanda. Okay, Amanda. So Amanda suffered with very severe trauma. And when I was connected with Amanda, she was actively working with a therapist, and she was working with a therapist that had psychedelic integration experience, and they had been working together for a minute anyway. So it was great. She had all this extra support, which she needed for sure. When Amanda first started working with the microdoses, it actually was really hard. She was a hot mess in some ways.
And I was like, if that was my client, I don't know if I would continue working with her. To be honest, it was just a really difficult beginning. Yeah.
Yeah, and for me, my position, especially because I knew she had legitimate therapy, legitimate support, my position is to just support in a way that makes sense for them, not for what I think they need, but really listening to them and what they need. When she first started microdosing, she was getting really angry. We got her started, everything seemed fine, but we're always taking it very slow, very cautious, just overall. And she hit me up within a week and a half of her microdosing, and she's Amber. I don't think that this is working for me. I don't think that mushrooms are for me. Oh, what's going on? What makes you think that? What's happening? And she was saying that every time she took one, she was getting very angry. She was so angry. She was angry at her husband. She was just angry. She said she would just get so furious. And for me, I was like, okay, that's really interesting.
And isn't the only person who this was happening for, right?
The anger.
The anger? Oh no, it might have been me. I was working as a ketamine integrator and I had something similar where there were a group of clients, not in group, I was working with them individually, but this comes up when
Yeah.
you're working with medicines that can take you to altered states of consciousness. So, anyways,
So I was thinking, okay, this is strange because normally people generally feel pretty good. It works with the serotonin 2A receptor, so there's a certain amount of happiness that kinda comes with it, right? The happy mind and creativity and things that generally people associate with mushrooms. So it was interesting that she was feeling very angry, and this is a clue for me. So for me, whenever I'm working with people and even with myself with mushrooms, I'm always curious. What is it trying to teach me? What
Mm.
is coming up? And whatever starts to surface is usually a key. It's like the white rabbit that takes you down the rabbit hole. So we often look for these keys, look for these little pieces of data that help us navigate and figure out what's going on. We did some investigation. I talked to her a little bit. And of course, she was welcome to stop trying it, but she really wanted to push through and what was, see further what was happening.
What did you suggest to her again?
We had just talked about why anger. So I was just being very curious and asking her questions. So I didn't have any specific suggestions at the time. I just was listening and asking her how she felt. Like
Okay.
if she wanted to stop, she was willing to do that. She was welcome to do that because mushrooms don't. It's not like taking a pharmaceutical where it's dangerous to come off of them once you can
Right.
be very flexible with mushrooms. So there's no rules around you have to keep going or you shouldn't do. It's really very flexible. So we kept discovering what was happening and she was saying that she opened up that she really had never learned how to cope with anger as a child, that anger and emotions in general were really not welcome in her home. And so, as a child, she just didn't learn coping mechanisms around anger, and anger was a bad thing to feel. So, she kept pushing it down. And this conversation went on about 2 or 3 days, and she talked to her therapist. And I asked her, we talked about there's a reason why this is coming up. There's something happening why this is coming up. It's like a little flag being like, over here's the clue. She realized that she had never learned how to cope with anger. Upon that realization, she had gotten herself a punching bag. She did all of these things because now the thought was, how do you cope with anger in a healthy way? And she was very motivated to get through this, and which I really appreciated about her personality in general. But so she got all these tools and discovered and talked to her therapist about how to cope with anger. And within about 3 days of her recognizing that she was feeling angry, us talking, her having therapy, or her getting a punching bag, and in that space, by her realizing that, she ended up is the realization where she would take the microdose and she would just get really angry. But after the realization and after that few days where she started doing practices to help her cope with her anger, everything switched. And she would take a microdose and she felt fantastic after that. It was like, oh, okay, great. Her system just needed her to address her anger and learn how to have a healthy relationship with herself and her anger. And so as soon as that started to turn, everything changed and she felt great. And so she ended up continuing on her path and her story is incredible. She was actually microdosing for about 6 months before taking a really good break, which is the extent of it.
You didn't even talk about her thyroid.
Yeah, so she ended up about at towards the 5, 6 months in, she ended up hitting me up again. And now I'm in conversation with all of my clients during their process, checking in with them, making sure they feel good, seeing where they're at, just helping them integrate along the way. So at one point, about 5 months, 6 months in, she ended up connecting with me again. And oh my gosh, Amber, I have to tell you about this. And you wouldn't believe it, but she has had a hypothyroid issue since she was 13. So puberty, I guess, where her thyroid wasn't making the proper hormones that it needed to. And so she was on major thyroid medication. And I didn't really know that at first. So she ends up contacting me and she's, oh my gosh, I've been going back to the doctors like every 2 weeks for the past month and a half. And every time she went back to the doctors, they would test her and her thyroid actually started to work where it hadn't been working before. And they had to continuously reduce her medication over and over. And every time she went every 2 weeks, they kept reducing her medication because her thyroid started to work again, which is incredible. And it made sense to me because I'm thinking, okay, the brain, the hippocampus, they talk to our organs and tell our body when we need adrenaline, when we need this and that. So our body is constantly in communication. And so when we're talking about the psilocybin working with the nervous system, which is the central communication center, to me it's just made sense of, oh, there was something going on with that communication with her
Yeah.
thyroid. And now this is a testimonial that you're not going to see research on, at least not just yet, because this is just a happenstance discovery through this one person's story. So it was incredible though. She was like, "Oh my gosh, my body is healing itself from the inside out." And I was like, "Wow.
Yeah.
That is so special."
It was like, not only that, she had gone through so much as far as medical intervention.
Yeah, she has a long story, and her story continues just like everybody else's. So for the sake of the testimonial though, and the client story, it was really special. And now she's getting her therapy license and wants to help with psychedelic integration work because of how impactful it's been. And those are the kind of stories that are just, I have so many special people in my life that have proven to me time and time again how this could work.
It's almost like I love it when it's somebody who's on the fence or skeptical. So Amanda really was. And I was like, wow, I know that you were not the type to push somebody into something. So when you're saying she was like wanting to push through, it's it was led by her, right? And so I'm only saying this to say that we have another friend here in the city who was telling us about a microdosing regimen she had done, and the person who was guiding her through it was pushing her to keep on going, even though she was hitting major roadblocks and forming anxiety where she never had it before. And so the push in that case wasn't the answer. And so this
Yeah.
is why I think it's really important to be working with somebody who understands the medicine and understands that it doesn't work like a pharmaceutical. It's different. It works with the system differently and it works with everybody's system differently. But like the results when people do really harness the power of the medicine or their systems, like really vibe with the medicine well, are incredible. It's almost like it feels like everybody has extraordinary results.
Yeah, it's really special. And there are some instances where it's just not appropriate, or some people don't want to continue. And that's great too, right?
Mhm.
Because this other woman, in the instance where she started to develop an anxiety disorder where there wasn't one. And after talking to her, I felt so bad for her. I was like, oh man, she wasn't doing the microdose regimen with me. She was doing it with somebody else. And in this type of situation, more is not better. It's not like you
Yeah.
still have a headache, so you take more Advil or ibuprofen. It's not the same. If you're trying to do bigger journey work and exploring altered states of consciousness in that space, more can be more beneficial sometimes. But in the case with the microdosing, it really isn't more better. It more isn't better all the time. So you really have to listen to the body and find those clues. Like, what is it trying to tell me? And so, in a case of that other woman here in Mexico City, I would have said, okay, it's time to stop and reevaluate, because it's not meant to push you into something that you don't feel is actually working. In other cases, I do have another client that it was a husband and wife. They were microdosing together, and actually their neighbors also microdosed together, the husband and wife. And the one couple did great. They got closer in their relationship. Their businesses blew up. They were so ecstatic and happy. They did a great, like they had a great testimony as well. And then the neighbors, very similar to character types, they're microdosing and their regimen didn't work for them. And it wasn't because they had a whole bunch of different things going on, but they ultimately The mushrooms don't let us mask.
Yeah. What does she mean? What do you mean by
The
that?
mushrooms don't let us stay in an illusion just because it's comfortable. So, for example, if you are at a job you do not like and you hope that mushrooms and microdoses help you to
Mm.
work harder and stay in that job, it's always a crapshoot because you could take the mushrooms and you might come to the realization, I don't like this job. In fact, I want to change my career completely. And there are instances where people want to actually just stay at their job because of the security or the comfort that they're experiencing. So it can get really hard to be truthful with yourself. And so the mushrooms will highlight the truth and doesn't really let you mask. So if you are somebody who's at your job that you absolutely hate and deep down you know you hate it, but but you love it, you love the people, you really want to in your job and this and that, you might be masking some of the hardship. Now, I'm not saying this is just a theoretical example that I've seen happen, but it's just one of those things where the mushrooms really amplify what's really going on inside. And that can be difficult. And if you're not prepared to really just look at some of that, and it's not always bad. It's not, oh my gosh, look at you hate this. It's, oh man, maybe there's just something better for me that feels more fulfilling. So it's not always this slap in the face kind of truth bomb, but it definitely makes it uncomfortable to continue going down a path that's already uncomfortable. So this other couple, they ended up stopping and it just didn't really work out for them because I just think that they had things going on that they actually needed some maybe professional support to really discover what was happening deep down. It wasn't really like very enjoyable for them. And often it seemed like they weren't getting the answers that they wanted.
Yeah, I think remembering this couple, what was happening was they were hoping that the mushroom would help them pretend that they actually wanted to be in the marriage, when in reality, that might not have been the best situation for either of them or both of them to be in. Because whether we like it or not, we are either being honest with ourselves about the way that we're living and the choices that we're making, or we're lying to ourselves.
Yeah.
And then there's that gray area where we might not know. And this is where the mushroom magic kind of comes in, where it will reveal it to you in a very gentle and subtle way. If you're doing microdoses and bigger journey, it reveals it to you in a much more sort of way.
Yeah. And in the case of the couple, yeah, it was pretty obvious that they were not enjoying their relationship, but they had been together for so long. They had children, they had a house, they had businesses, they had all this stuff together. They definitely didn't want to separate. And that's not the only answer.
Yeah.
So I'm a creative as well, artist and this and that. And so with this mushroom work, it has also been highlighted multiple times. There's not just two answers. It's not stay in the job or leave the job, stay in the marriage or leave the marriage. It's not black and white. There's always a third option. There's always an more creative option. If they maybe potentially were more open in their communication about what they were really feeling, they could have repaired their relationship and actually put themselves on a whole new track. Or the job that if you didn't like your job, the mushrooms might highlight that, but they also might show you, oh, look, there's another option. There's actually another position that's more suited for you. So it's never just black and white. There's always a third option. So just as a general rule, if you come across a decision or a choice point where you think there's only this option or the other one, just consider what's the third option. What's the third potential, and it might be something creative that you haven't discovered yet, and ultimately that can be really life-changing where it's, I thought I had to stay here, and then I thought, if I don't stay here then I have to move, and now I live in two places instead of just one, or there's just always a third option. So
Yeah. So in the cases of these clients and these client stories, maybe you can relate to one of them or more. If you have any curiosity if what you're going through could be helped with microdosing, of course, neither of us are doctors and we're not here to prescribe or even to tell you in any sort of official way what to do. But if you're wondering about your own personal situation and if it's a good opportunity to maybe consider working with psilocybin, you can ask questions in the comments.
Yeah, and just in general, I support people with whether they're microdosing or macrodosing. I support people with integration and help along the process of this. So if you find yourself in a position to be wanting to do that, I do free consultations as well to just talk about whatever and wherever you're at. If you do need support, I would highly suggest it. It's really helpful to just have somebody to remind you what the third option could be. Thank you.
That's all we got for you today. I'm Jen.
And I'm Amber. And if you want more information, definitely in the comments, or you can go to my website at mindfulrabbit.space.
Ta-da!